For those who don't know me, I'm Bonnie Hamilton, and I am co-chair of the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter, along with Harriet Harvey Horn, who can't be here with me tonight. So I'm on my own, along with Kevin, who's my
have a pillow we can sit it on.
My backup support person. So first of all, I want to welcome everyone on behalf of the Climate Reality Bay Area community, and it's wonderful to see you all here. We're thrilled to be doing this program, especially at a time when many of us are experiencing climate overwhelm, as well as experiencing the stressors and joys of the holiday season. So thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. I believe it will be worth your while. Our program is titled Fostering Resilience and Mental Wellbeing in the Climate Crisis, and we have a special guest speaker, Shaun Trainer. Many of us experience grief, anxiety, and overwhelm when confronting the climate crisis, and it challenges our health and mental well-being. And by fostering resilience and meaningful hope, we can redirect climate anxiety and grief into purposeful action. Shaun will discuss strategies, tips, and offer suggestions for how to best support ourselves and others. Before turning things over to Shaun, we want to take a moment to share a bit about the Climate Reality Project and the Bay Area chapter. The Climate Reality Project is an international nonprofit organization founded and chaired by former U.S. President and Nobel laureate Al Gore. Mr. Gore founded Climate Reality in 2007 with a mission to mobilize a global grassroots network of climate advocates. Today, Climate Reality spans 170 countries with over 50,000 climate reality leaders around the world, trained personally by Mr. Gore to speak truth to power about the climate crisis and its solutions. The Bay Area chapter is one of the earliest and largest regional chapters of the Climate Reality Project. Since our founding in 2017, we have taken the Climate Reality mission to the local level with over 1,500 members, catalyzing solutions to address the climate crisis and climate justice across the San Francisco Bay Area. Our activities are anchored in the core tenets of the Climate Reality mission: to educate and inform the public, to use climate justice lens for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in all we do, and to mobilize a grassroots network of climate advocates to take action that will lead us to a cleaner, safer, more prosperous, and thriving future. Our chapter is comprised of roughly half climate leaders trained by Mr. Gore and half otherwise committed community members. Our goal is for the Bay Area and California to lead and serve as a compelling model of a regenerative future for the rest of the United States and the world. We invite you to learn more about our chapter by going to our website at climaterealitybayarea.org. I just have one announcement, which is that we are planning a chapter-wide in-person event on January 28th. Please save the date, and for those who are in our area, there'll be more information to come about our event. And two quick housekeeping notes. The event is being recorded and will be available on the Climate Reality Bay Area public YouTube channel within the next couple of weeks. And we ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation or put them in the chat. There'll be ample time for discussion and question and answers, and we look forward to that portion of the meeting. Now, as per our tradition, we'll open the space with an acknowledgement of the land that we reside on. With respect, we acknowledge the Ohlone, Miwok, Putwin, and other indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands we currently occupy in the greater San Francisco region. This land acknowledgement helps remind us of the historic and ongoing oppression of indigenous people, how the taking and occupying of indigenous lands and the exploitation of indigenous people and those lands is directly connected to the climate crisis, and how building relationships with and following the leadership of indigenous people here and everywhere is crucial as we seek and build long-term solutions to the global climate crisis. So we're very honored to be on this land. Now, I'd like to introduce our special guest speaker, Shaun Trainer. Shaun is a mental well-being and climate justice advocate, researcher, and activist from Mi'kmaq, commonly known as Nova Scotia, residing in Tiohtià:ke, commonly known as Montreal. They have been active in the climate and social justice movements for over a decade. Shaun has taken the knowledge they have gained from their studies and activism and is working to raise awareness of the effects of the climate crisis on mental well-being, as well as how we can move toward regenerative cultures by fostering meaningful hope through art in all its many forms. Recently, Shaun has been leading a youth climate circle and co-facilitated Flourish, a youth learning journey of climate resilience and regeneration with One Resilient Earth. The climate circle offers a space for youth around the world to come together in a community to share their emotions, insights, and experiences of the climate crisis. Flourish is a deep learning journey from climate anxiety to courage, regeneration, and resilience within a global community. Additionally, Shaun is writing a book on mental well-being in the climate crisis and the role of art in fostering resilience and regeneration. So welcome, Shaun. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Bonnie, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight, for having me come speak, for wanting to hear what I have to say. I greatly appreciate it. I hope that everyone has had a good day, that they're having a good evening, and that they're ready to really delve into mental health and well-being within the climate crisis. It is a very important topic and very front of mind for many of us. Before I begin, as it was mentioned, I am residing in Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal. And so I'm not on the same territory as you. So I do want to acknowledge that I am in Tiohtià:ke, the unceded territory of the Kahnawake Nation. It is so important that we do acknowledge this and that we take action in our day-to-day lives to work towards reconciliation and decolonization. This, as was also mentioned, will lead towards greater action on the climate crisis, but also will enable us to have greater mental health and well-being as we work to take away these oppressive systems and acknowledge that these oppressive systems exist. So I'm just going to share my screen now and we can get underway. So yeah, again, welcome. Tonight is all about fostering resilience and mental well-being in the climate crisis. So before I really get into all of the more specifics and into some ways to really foster that resilience, I think it's really important that we have definitions, ones that we all sort of understand and have this common base. If we don't have a common understanding, then we can't move forward together. So mental well-being, it's our perception and evaluation of our own lives, then living what we perceive to be a meaningful life. And this can be different for everybody, but it's important that we have this concept together. Resilience, it's the ability to adapt in the face of adverse conditions and recover from a crisis. This is something that we need to build, that we need to foster, and that's why I'm talking about it tonight. That's why you're all here. But it is really important because we are in a crisis. For too long, we have called it climate change, and we do need to start calling it climate crisis. Then there's ecological grief, a term coined by researcher Dr. Ashley Consolo, and it's the sense of loss that arises from experiencing or learning about environmental destruction and or climate change, climate crisis. And then there's eco-anxiety. This is the most common term, the one that most of you, if not all of you, have likely heard, likely used. It's also known as climate anxiety, and it's simply put the chronic fear of environmental doom. And last on my list of definitions, I have solastalgia. This is a much less commonly used term, but one that I think is really important and one that many around the world do experience. It was created by Glenn Albrecht, who's from Australia, and is trying to really expand our vocabulary around the crises that we're experiencing. And so solastalgia is the homesickness you have when you are still at home and your home environment is changing in ways that you find distressing. So an example of this is Glenn Albrecht's own experience. He is from rural Australia, and where he lives, there was a forested area, which was then sold to a mining company who completely cut down the entire forest and created an open pit mine. And these people were still living in this area, but it had gone from one of pristine nature to one of an open pit coal mine. And so their whole ecosystem had completely changed, but they were still in that place. And they had not changed, just the ecosystem had changed around them. And so the way that they interacted with it was completely different. It was no longer the home that they had known, that they had grown up with, that they connected with. And so I think it's a really important term that we have. So mental illness occurs when our health is compromised or neglected for so long that it affects our ability to function in our everyday life. And when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about this crisis, it's important to highlight anxiety and trauma. Anxiety is a normal response to a threat, such as the climate crisis. Anxiety is our body's way of trying to warn us that to take action and to prevent the harm that we are perceiving. That harm can come in many forms. It can be many things. And the way that our body tries to get us to respond is there are 4 basic threat responses that we usually go through or could have. The first is that we flee. If we can escape the threat, we try to flee it. With the climate crisis, this isn't really possible. Perhaps for a while, in a sense, not a true sense, it was possible if you could flee a certain area, but as it gets worse and worse, it is encapsulating the whole planet, and ultimately there was never going to be a way to flee it. And going to another planet is not a solution, and not fleeing it. If we can't live on this one, why do we think we can do it on another? Fight, if we can overpower the threat. Again, this is not really possible in the climate crisis. We can't overpower climate change, but we can work to mitigate it and ensure that the impacts are less than what they could be. Freeze is another response to threat. If we can make the threat lose interest, this is not possible with the climate crisis. It's not going to lose interest. It doesn't have that sort of thought process. So we cannot just freeze. We need to find a way to get out of that threat response of when we're frozen and unable to really do action and just hoping that it goes away. This is one of the most common responses because we're overwhelmed. This anxiety, the feelings that we're feeling become so overwhelming that we just freeze. And this is something that we need to find different practices within our life to really work with our emotions and get out of that space. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about tonight. And fawn is the last threat response. If we can appease the threat, negotiate with the threat, again, not really possible. We can't appease the threat and negotiate it, but we can work, again, to mitigate it, to address the climate crisis, and we can work with our emotions to appease them and to work with them in the end instead of trying to pretend that they aren't there, trying to escape from them, trying to overpower them, trying to pretend that everything is fine. We ultimately need to actually work with them and acknowledge these emotions. And if none of the threat responses have reasonable chance of success, our mind body, it will disconnect, it will disassociate. We will get into a feeling of paralysis, which is what I would say the majority of humans are in now. The majority of people do understand that we're in the climate crisis. They do understand that this is a threat that we need to address, but they're frozen in fear and then unable to take action. So they're disassociating, and they're trying to disconnect from reality in many different ways, through consumerism, through virtual reality, through simply going about their lives in a way which ignores, but to an extent, the climate crisis. An individual and collective trauma or climate trauma related to environmental breakdown, which can explain different levels of climate denial, as I've just mentioned, or inaction. And ultimately, trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms us and our ability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness, diminishing a sense of self, and the ability to feel a full range of emotions. This is a place that many of us now are experiencing trauma. If it's an existential crisis for our species and our planet. If there's something more distressing than that and disturbing, I'm not sure what it would be. So this is really where we as a society, as a species, are experiencing a trauma that we need to come together and collectively work through. So what can be done to remain emotionally and mentally healthy in this time of climate crisis? Well, there are a number of things. So as I mentioned already a few times, to begin with, it's so important that we work with, not against, our emotions. For many of us, we would rather ignore them, especially those of us here in North America. We are very much raised within a society and a thought system that we should always be happy or fine or okay, that we're always meant to be able to take care of ourselves, and that nothing should really be wrong. If something is wrong, we're just not doing it right. We're not excelling at the human experience, but that's not true. We all feel a full range of emotions, and we should acknowledge these emotions. We don't have to always be good, always be happy. We can be sad, we can be overwhelmed, we can be feeling anxious. These are all fully acceptable and fully normal emotions to experience, and we don't have to always be able to do everything ourselves. So we really need to learn to speak up and express our emotions in a way that enables those around us to know what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, and try to relate to us and be able to understand why maybe in this moment I'm unable to take on these additional tasks, or unable to take on this new role because I'm feeling overwhelmed by the climate crisis, and I need to speak about it, and I need to work through that trauma. And for many of us, we'll often do more to feel less, when really we should not be doing that. We can still do many things, but we shouldn't be doing that to feel less. This is something that I've personally done in the past. So I'm speaking from experience on this one. In the past, especially throughout my time at university, not only was I studying full time, but I was working multiple jobs. I was involved in numerous organizations, on the board of the student union, and I was trying to be as busy as I possibly could. And for me, it was all about trying to make student life better, but also addressing all sorts of different environmental issues and raising awareness about the climate crisis and getting people to take action and going to protests and getting the university to change some of its less environmentally friendly practices. And I was doing all of this, and I felt that by doing so much, it was the best thing that I could be doing for myself and for the planet and for addressing the climate crisis. But ultimately, it wasn't. Ultimately, I was burning myself out. I experienced burnout multiple times during my studies. And I was not enabling myself to really sit down, to acknowledge the emotions that I was feeling, to acknowledge that I was grieving for the loss of life on the planet, grieving for what my generation and future generations will go through, anxious about having children, about what the future could hold for them, anxious about many different things about that. And for me, I was just instead putting all of my energy into taking action. And so I really try to now get across the point that we need to not do more to feel less, but rather take into account that even while we can still take action, but we also need that inner action. We need to take care of ourselves and ensure that we're taking care of one another. And so it's really important that we seek support. There are many different ways we can do that. And this list is by no means the be-all and end-all of possibilities for seeking support. Family and friends is one option, perhaps not always the option for everyone, depending on your relation with your family, but they are somebody that if you do have a good relation with them, they are there for you, they care for you, and they will often try to understand and maybe are also experiencing similar emotions. Definitely your friends. Usually our friends are often people of like mind to us. And so they are often all in the same sort of place that we are, maybe experiencing soul nostalgia or ecological grief or climate anxiety or overwhelm or burnout, just like we are. But they may also not be talking about it, and they may also be experiencing trauma. They most likely are. Almost all of us are experiencing trauma right now due to the climate crisis. So it's really important that we seek that support from our family and friends. I think that both of these options are usually a very good first place to go for support. But if it doesn't feel right to you, if that's something that you want to wait, if you don't feel that your family and friends would be supportive or if you're just nervous or not ready to talk to them yet or be that open with them in that sort of way, then climate circles or climate cafes, they're very similar in how they work, slightly different, but quite similar. And they're a space which I host one every Wednesday for people 30 and under. But the org One Resilient Earth also hosts one every Tuesday. And they are a space for people to come together, people from all over the world, to come together to share their emotions, their insights, their experiences with the climate crisis in a safe and supportive space. And this space enables you, at least in the circle that I host, you can share not simply through speaking. You could also share a work of art that you've created, poetry, music, whatever it might be that you feel will help you to express the emotions that you're feeling to those in the circle and help you get out what you're feeling. There are all sorts of different ways to do that, but climate circles are a great space. They're a safe space, and they happen quite often, and it can really be quite liberating for many. to come to a space where, as I said, if you're not ready to be open in that sort of way with your family and friends, this is often a group of people you won't know, and it can be sort of liberating to share to people you may never see in your day-to-day life. But then there's the Good Grief Network and all you can save circles and grief circles. Those are similar again to the climate circles and the climate cafes, a little bit more specific to grief and working towards what we can save on the planet. But the Good Grief Network is just an important resource overall. They also offer a course on working through your emotions, sort of based on Alcoholics Anonymous. I would definitely recommend. It's several weeks long. I cannot remember the price of it, but it is another good resource, and they provide you with further resources. Then there's Gen Dread. It's a website and newsletter created by, as well as social media accounts, created by Dr. Britt Ray, who is one of the leading researchers and minds on mental health and well-being. So I would highly recommend their website, their newsletter, and all sorts of social media, including their own, as it really can provide you with a lot of other resources that might help you with acknowledging and working with those emotions. And then seeking out a psychologist. And here, as you can see, I have in brackets climate psychologist. This is a really important caveat because psychologists are just other people. And they too are experiencing the same trauma. And many of them might be in the space where they haven't dealt with that trauma. And so they're in denial, they're frozen, and they are unable to properly work with patients, and they might be denying that the climate crisis is even having an effect on people's mental health and well-being. So I really believe it's important that you find one that is specializing in acknowledging that the climate crisis is a reality and that it is affecting our mental health and well-being. Because if you can find one that is doing this, they will be much more supportive and much more able to help you work through those emotions than one who perhaps is not. That's not to say that there aren't ones who put it in their bio that that's what they're working with, but it is definitely better if you can find one that is specifically a climate psychologist. Then you could also take a mental health first aid course. I think this would just overall be good for everyone to take because we're pretty bad in our society at working with mental health in general. So I would always recommend a mental health first aid course to people. And explore tools and approaches that work for you specifically. It's really important that we take a trauma-informed approach to acknowledging and working with our emotions. Yes, we are all experiencing the climate crisis and the trauma that comes with it, but we're all experiencing that differently due to our lived experiences and the other traumas that we have in our life. So it's very important that you seek support and use the tools that would work for you based on your own past trauma and the way that you're experiencing this. And you may also already have tools that you know work. So I think it's really important to work with those and not just what I recommend. And then it's important for avoiding and recovering from climate trauma. We don't just want to work with our emotions. We want to avoid repeating this trauma over and over again, and we want to recover from the trauma that we're experiencing and ensure that we can live those meaningful and healthy, mentally healthy lives that I mentioned before, and that we all want to live. We all want to have a meaningful life in which we can enjoy our time on planet Earth. So for me, again, this list is not the be-all and end-all of lists, but it is really important to set up a holistic and lifelong care plan for yourself. There are many different things that you could do. A few of them are listed here. So one that I bring into my life is breathing. This is simply you can focusing on your breath, taking time out of your day to just sit, stand, whatever it might be, even if you're walking, to focus on the in and out of your breath. This can be very calming and help you bring you back to the moment and help you bring you back to a place of focus, especially if you find yourself spiraling or you find yourself really in a trauma mindset, in a trauma sort of spiral, for a lack of a better word. It is really important to recenter yourself and to bring yourself back to a place where you can acknowledge and work with those emotions. Food and beverage. This one may seem odd to many, but it is a great way that that is holistic and that we can easily be lifelong. We're all going to need food and beverage throughout our entire lives. Same with breathing, but it is also one that we can do in community. And community is really key to working through our climate trauma, as I've mentioned numerous times, we're collectively experiencing this trauma. It is a collective trauma. And food and beverage is one way that humans can connect with one another across cultures, across languages, and across the world. So it is a really simple one. Just come into community and share food, share drinks, share whatever it might be. Connect with people over the dinner table. It's a great way to just sit down and to have conversations that you might not have, and with people that you may not have. Potlucks are a great way to do this. Everyone brings something, and it can be in a community of people that you may have never met before, and it may really help you to be able to talk with others and see that you're not alone in these feelings. Sleep and exercise is another really important one. Again, may seem odd, but if we're not having a good sleep pattern and a good exercise pattern, we will get really out of line, and we will not be able to properly work with those emotions, as we will be too exhausted and will become burnt out. And then next, we should really try to take time to disconnect and be in nature, disconnecting from all of our social media and all of our other electronics, because they can be very overwhelming, and we can really get bogged down in the news and in the consumerism that is generated through social media, an unhealthy as well idea of what life needs to be. And so really just, taking care of nature and being in nature. And for many of us, myself, I live in the city. This could simply be getting out and going for a walk and to a park if there's one near you, being in your garden if you have one, or if you can, getting out of a city, out of your town, and truly being in nature and connecting with it. It's so important. We are a part of it. We forget it often, and each time I'm able to be in it, I know it's really meaningful, and it really does help me to be aware of just how fast-paced life can be and how disconnected I've become at times. Cold exposure, another odd one, but this is not to say go spend an hour in the ocean in the cold. It's more to say just to take a cold shower briefly to really re-regulate your body. It can be quite helpful. It will be very shocking the first time you do it, maybe every time you do it, but it is a good one to do. And then meditation, mindfulness, that one more or less speaks for itself, but it is an important practice that anyone can bring into their life. And meditation doesn't simply need to be sitting on the floor, doing mantras, but it can be the breathing that I mentioned before. It can be going for a walk. That can be meditative practice for many people. And then practicing compassion and nonviolence. It's really important that we are compassionate with ourselves and nonviolent with ourselves and others. And by this, I mean understanding that we are in a crisis. We are in the climate crisis, and this is extraordinary times. And it's okay to not be able to go out to a protest every time there is one. It's okay to not do every little thing in every possible aspect of living the most eco-friendly lifestyle. And not everyone will be able to do that anyway. And so it's really important to be compassionate with yourself and to practice this compassion and nonviolence towards others as well. We don't know what is going on in another person's life. So it's really important that we acknowledge that they are likely doing the best that they can, and to support them in whatever way we can, and to support ourselves, and to take that time to recover from whatever we're going through, and to get back into it when we can. Because ultimately, if we're only doing the outer work, that is going out and protesting, recycling, going to the legislature and trying to get change, we'll only get so far, because we'll all burn out. And so there needs to be that inner change and that inner work of compassion and nonviolence, and taking care of our mental health and well-being. Journaling and art is another great way. Just get your emotions out through writing, through creating poems, through creating paintings, music, whatever art form might speak to you. It can be a great way to really explore our emotions in a way that's less verbal, unless you are doing writing. For many, I think we don't often find the time to allow ourselves to be creative, but this can really help us to see that emotions don't need to simply be spoken, that they can be expressed in a more creative way, and that art can really speak to so many others, and it can help us relate to others in ways that language might not. And then community care and decolonizing the self. It's really important that we take care of not just ourselves, but those in our community, and that we find a community that we can be in. As I mentioned with the food and beverages, it is all community. We are in a collective trauma. And so if we can take care of ourselves, we also can then take care of those in our community. And decolonizing the self, which I mentioned very briefly in my opening, we do live under an oppressive system. Many may think colonization has passed. It hasn't. It still exists. Colonization is what has really fueled the climate crisis. This idea that a group of people are better than others, and that nature is here for us to consume and for us to be over top of and to use to our pleasure is incorrect. And we need to change that mindset and work towards understanding that all people are equal, and that we are a part of nature. And that nature is not just here for us to use, but for us to work with in unison. And if we are kind and caring of it, it will take care of us. So navigate your emotions and cultivate joy despite it all. Despite everything, it is really important that you do work with your emotions, and you do find joy in life and in the things that we do, and in working through this trauma. And find a community of purpose, people that you feel connected with, that you feel support you, that you feel you can take action with, both inner and outer. It could be a community that you go and clean up garbage with. It could be a community that you go and protest with. It could be a community that you organize climate cafes with, or it could be a community you do art with. It could be a community that you talk about mental health and well-being. It's just important that you do find community, and don't allow yourself to get into this mindset that you're alone in these feelings, and that it's not possible to work through them, and it's not possible for us to address the climate crisis, because it very much is. And so now I'm going to open it up to you to put in the chat. I will give you about 3 minutes, I think, 3 to 5 perhaps. So I want everyone to imagine that the year is 2070. So what does a day, and this, regardless if you will be alive in 2070 or not, depending on age, just you are the age you are now. The year is 2070. What does a typical day in your life look like? What do you think it will be? Not what do you hope it will be, but what do you think, based on all that we know, what do you think a typical day will look like for you? And just please put that in the chat. I'll give about 3 minutes. Okay, yeah, a few have put some things in the chat about hotter temperatures, water scarcity, drier weather, less rainfall, unimaginable technology, about working in community garden, about changed temperature, less people living in pod communities or pods and communities to share resources. That's very difficult due to higher heat, etc. No longer massive industrial food systems, lots of refugees, quieter, more mindful. Because if we're still here, we'd better be better working on indoor farm. And so now I'm going to pose this question to you again and give you another couple minutes. So the year is, again, 2070. But this time, and when you think of what does a typical day look like for you, what does a typical day look for you that you hope it will be, that you want a typical day for you to be? Imagining that exactly what you would want the future to hold, not what you think it's going to be, not what based on the science, but what would you, that we have right now, what would you really want that day to look like? Yeah, again, and there's some good answers coming in. Peace on earth, as folks have realized that we have to work together, all regenerative farming practices, cooperation valued over competition, a lifestyle of stewardship, not consumption, flying to work in an electric helicopter over a verdant beautiful landscape, work in a garden and paint, spending time with loved ones and in nature based on connection and care, a slower, calmer pace where we are and have enough, renewable energy use, mild temperatures, balanced seasons with the right amount of rainfall, advanced communities with high tech, less climate anxiety. Oops. Yeah. So this is why I find this question that I pose really important. I think it's, for many of us, we get stuck in this mindset of the future is going to be much more apocalyptic. That's the message that we get in the media. That's the message that we get in through more creative means such as Hollywood and other avenues, books, and social media. These all sort of portray a more apocalyptic future that awaits us. And of course, that could be reality if we don't address the climate crisis. But it doesn't have to be. And this is what I find when I ask that question, is that most people do want a quieter, calmer future, one that is regenerative, one that is a much less consumption, one often that capitalism is not the be all and end all, one in which we're able to do art, garden, have time with loved ones. Right now, so many of us are overworked that we are unable to explore this creative side of us, unable to spend the time that we wish we could with loved ones. And so we often imagine the future in a way in which that we can do those things. And that's entirely possible, that future. And that's why I like to get people to take that little time to think about it, think about what they really want. Because if we do all we're taking that time, we can make it a reality. We can reimagine the world. Remember that the world we live in is constantly changing, and we can create a better one. It does not need to continuously be this. It hasn't always been what it is now. It's constantly in flux, and we can create a better one. And so I think it's really important that you do take this time and get people around you to take this time, get talking to people about the future that we want, reimagining that world in a way in which we can do art, we can be with family and friends, we can garden, we can fly our electric helicopters over beautiful landscapes. And I find that art is the perfect way to do this. It enables us to break out of the boxes that we have been put into, that our society has us in. Often that's the box of, well, a 9 to 5, a box of that we must work all the time, that we must sacrifice time with family and friends in order to get ahead, that we must consume to be happy, that art is frivolous, where really art is really powerful. And of course, those with power and the interests that do not want to address climate change or see things change don't want us exploring art, because through art, revolutions can happen and the world can change. So I think I always encourage people to try it out. Nobody has to be Picasso or any other great painter or musician at all. We're all artists in our own right. I love to explore art in all sorts of different ways, from writing to painting to drawing. I'm awful if you were to try to base it off of if I'm trying to do this as a career, but I'm not. Art is, ultimately whatever we want it to be. And I really enjoy it, and I find it helps me really foster that resilience and my own mental health. But I also, as it enables me to imagine a future that I want, helps me to connect with other people that are trying to reimagine the world and imagine a new way of living. And for me, I really want to be able to live in the future where I can just do art and not have to worry about the climate crisis and not have to worry about paying the bills. So get out there and explore the different art forms and unleash your imagination. It is one of the most powerful things that we have, and it is one of the best ways that we can truly get to the root of our trauma and to get connected with other people and get our emotions out there. Find a community that inspires you. Again, this is not a be-all and end-all list, but solar punk is a artistic community that is reimagining the future that is run by renewables and in which takes a justice lens to a future that is run on renewables. It is a really great community. I love it. It's one that I delve into often. Afrofuturism is another one that I really love, similar to solar punk, but this one comes at it from an approach that is much more diverse. Often we can get lost in our society, which promotes whiteness and white people and white saviorism, which is all awful. That's just not reality. And so Afrofuturism is trying to raise awareness of how people of color are a part of all of this, that they are affected by climate change, and that they will be a part of creating this better future and better world that we're going to go in, and creating that sort of solar punk future. And so Afrofuturism is another one I would highly recommend. I just recently started reading another book on it. Material ecology. This looks at how we can sort of mesh engineering principles and the natural world together, looking at how we can have much more natural intertwined landscapes that are human-made, but really bring in the natural elements instead of concrete cities that we live in now. And then More Than Human Politics is seeing that, yes, we are one species, but there are many species experiencing this climate crisis, and we need to think about them as well as we address this crisis. And then, of course, you could always create your own community, and I highly recommend that you do. And again, just remember that the world we live in is constantly changing, and we can create a better one. So reimagine it and create that future that you want. And then perhaps today's new openings in thought and action can afford us an opportunity to build sanctuaries, places where people can feel safe and held, where a composting of ourselves can take place. This was said by Bayo Akomolafe. It is one of my favorite quotes. Because again, it just hits at the point that whatever we're imagining now, whatever action we're taking, what we're thinking, the thoughts that we're having, this reimagining of the future, one day it can really become the reality, and it can be the places that we want. And so climate activism is a part of all of this, of course. So I do want to briefly touch on that. It is a way, of course, to also work with your emotions. But as I mentioned earlier, don't do it in a way in which you're doing more to feel less. And yeah, reimagining is just the beginning. It is a way to catalyze activism, catalyze action. Without this reimagined future, without knowing what we ultimately want and having a clear goal, we won't be able to get there. And that's why I think that it is really important that we have this utopian sort of future, because our utopia will be one day somebody's reality, and they will have a utopia that will be their kids or their grandkids' reality. What we're living was once somebody's, aside from the climate crisis, the way that our standard of living was once a utopia for people. So as long as we can continue to reimagine those futures in a way, they can become a reality for somebody else. Our kids, grandkids, it will be their reality. So engage in ways that feel regenerative and aligned with what matters to you. If you're not doing what matters to you, what feels right to you, then it won't work. We can't all do everything. For me, it's mental health and well-being. That is my thing. That is what I am engaged with. That is what my focus is on. I have others that I am engaged in to an extent, and there are many other things that I would love to be engaged with, but I know that I can't stretch myself and do everything, and I know that there are other people out there who it is really their passion, and it's what really aligns with them. And so I leave that for them. I'm happy to work with them. I'm happy to support them, and I always will. But I think we need to find what we can really hone in on and work with, and know that there are other people working on the things that we can't always take on, and find what. Yeah, as I said, find what works for you. This could be through art, communication, regenerative agriculture, reforestation, care work, dreaming together, and organizing around a cause. Care work is any sort of work that takes care of one another. We often don't think of climate activism as being things such as going and taking care of loved ones, of people whose job it is to take care of those we love. But that is ultimately climate activism, because we, as I've been talking throughout this, we are experiencing this collective trauma. And so if we're not taking care, then it's not true activism, because we can't just let people go to the wayside because of their mental health, and because of burnout. We all need to be in this together, or it won't work. But these are all just a few ways to really take action, whichever speaks to you. Ultimately, that's what you should find. And engage with nature and the community can help both with mental well-being and the restoration of ecosystems. It is a great way for fostering resilience and mental well-being. And so lastly, as was mentioned at the very beginning, a lot of my work seems to be youth focused, but it is not all youth focused. I do really believe in intergenerational support and in intergenerational work, because those, we're all coming from different experiences, different ways of seeing the world, and different understandings and different experiences. And so I think it's really important that we share experiences across generations, and that we create space for community to grow and flourish. Support youth in their reimagining of the future. If you're not youth yourself, it is them who will be living that future. So it's really important that we support their reimagining. Those in older generations may have ideas and that they can contribute, but ultimately it is for the youth to recreate this future, and for those in other generations to support them in making this future a reality, because they will be the ones living it. But share experiences, because people have been trying and fighting against the climate crisis and trying to raise awareness for generations. So there is all this experience and knowledge that can be shared across generations. And this is why I think that this work is so important. Don't let generational differences hold you back. We are continually creating and recreating, and that is a part of the beauty of life. No matter if you don't fully see why youth may want the future to be a certain way, it is ultimately them who will be living it. So we should and not let that difference hold us back in our support for them. As this photo, which I'm in there somewhere, was taken when I was living in Sweden, it shows that people can come together, and that the motivation and the idea of one younger person can bring together people from all generations, all walks of life, to create a space to connect every week, every month, whatever it may be for you, and support one another in their experiences of the climate crisis, and support one another's mental health and well-being, and support their reimagining of that future. And through that reimagining, again, their mental health and well-being will be supported. So this is where intergenerational support is key. Additionally, resources are often fewer for those who are youth, and this is where older generations can really help. But it will also help your own mental health when you're working with people and you see that it's not just, especially for youth, they can see that it's not just them experiencing the climate crisis and experiencing ecological grief. It's so important that we see that people from all walks of life and all age groups are going through this collective trauma. And so ultimately, I hope that this was helpful for you, that this was engaging, that this gave you some new insights, some new ideas, some new practices that you can bring into your day-to-day life. If there's ever any questions that you might have, if there's ever any resources that you might want to share with me, or that you might want to request from me, please do feel free to reach out to me. Or if you would like me to host Climate Circle with you, I am available to do that. Or if you would like me to come and speak to another group that you are a part of, I am also available for that. It's something that I really enjoy, and I am happy to also tailor it a little bit more to specific groups. And it can be groups that are just seniors, groups that are all ages, groups that are just youth, whatever it might be. I am happy to do it at basically any hour of the day, more or less, since it is after 10 now for me. So thank you, everyone who was here. Thank you for listening and participating as well with the questions that I did have. I think now I'll hand it back over to Bonnie for the next little bit.
Great. Thank you very much, Shaun. Just want to follow up on that. Someone did put in the chat, they wanted to know if you could share some information about your climate cafe.
Let me just grab a link to that and I'll put it in the chat. So I've put the links to both the circle that I host, which is the Youth Climate Circle, so for people 30 and under, but also to the Climate Workers Circle. Workers is a broad term because everybody's job relates to the climate crisis. Also, you don't need to be working to join that. It's simply a space for people of all age groups to join in.
That's great. Thank you. And then some other things in the chat. I know I actually use this quote myself, but Joan Baez famously said, "Action is the antidote to despair." And what's your response to that? I think a lot of us work in that space of, okay, and you talked about this at the beginning, how folks get over, they do too much to try to deal with the despair.
Yeah, sorry, could you just repeat the quote? I got a little bit distracted by it.
Yeah, it's by Joan Baez. Action is the antidote to despair. And I use that myself frequently, I must say. Yeah,
again, for this, action is definitely a key part of working through and working with our mental health and well-being, and with the emotions that we're experiencing in the climate crisis. As I mentioned a few times throughout, for me, there are really two forms of action: outer action and inner action. And I think these are both what can help us work with despair. There is the outer action where we can go out and be in the streets or cleaning the streets with garbage pickups. That's something I've done myself a lot, or going to the legislature, whatever it might be. being in organizations such as this. And that can help us really see that there are other people that are wanting to engage with this, and that there are other people trying their best. And that is important. But if it's not paired with this inner action, I don't feel that we're going to get there all the way, because we're not enabling ourselves to take the time to process our emotions, and to connect on that deeper level, not just with ourselves, but with those that we're taking that outer action with. So I think when we say that, action is a way to deal with despair, it needs to be both that inner and outer action, not just one or the other, especially not if it's simply outer actions, which has often been the case because humans are notoriously awful at dealing with mental health, or even acknowledging that that's a thing. But we are getting there, and I mean, which is proof by everybody being here tonight.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that certainly makes sense, that part of the action definitely needs to be internal, and what you're doing on your own to address your own feelings around what's going on, for sure. At the same time, being able to then focus out into the world and to bring, it's like that thing you hear about, when you put the oxygen on yourself first before you can, on the airplane, right before you give it to the child. There was another, just a comment in the chat. It said, we are often told, and I often repeat this, that taking action is a way to empower ourselves in the face of all this uncertainty, anxiety, but it leads to overdoing. But again, I think you addressed that well, and I appreciate that. I think we'll just open it up and see if folks have any comments or questions, or actually somebody else also put in the chat another question. Jeannie put in a question, have you thought about or bring in work on removing our victim-perpetrator dynamic?
Yeah, I think this is something which I did address briefly, but it is something that I want to work more around and to bring into more into what I do talk about in the work that I do, is removing that victim-perpetrator dynamic, which is the part that I talked about around compassion and nonviolence, that we so often do either feel that, oh, I didn't recycle that thing, I bought that thing with plastic, I drove today instead of cycling or taking the bus, I flew home for the holidays, or I had a child, because that's now one for many people. I think that that's a really dangerous way of approaching this. Yes, it's important that we do as much as we can, but we need to have that compassion that we can't be perfect all the time. And in a sense, we are a victim of the system, but we need to see that although we do these small things, maybe that aren't great at times, we are ultimately doing our best, and we are ultimately experiencing trauma. So we need to give ourselves a break, and we need to give those around us a break. I'm not saying just be like, screw it and do all of the things that you shouldn't do. I'm just saying, understand that you can't be 100% perfect. Additionally, we are humans. We're not perfect, as much as we might like to think we are. And so it's really that aspect that I do want to work more with, but I do think it's having that compassion for one another and understanding that everybody is trying their best, but most are in a place of denial due to their grief, and we can't simply put that on them to be better, and attack them for that. I don't know if that answers that question, but it is something I want to work more with.
I think compassion is a little bit confusing because we tend to think of it as being compassionate for others, where it really does start. It's like the oxygen, it starts here, because if we're not compassionate with ourselves, it's almost impossible to be truly compassionate with others. So a lot of times it's that self-compassion that is part of that internal work and action that you were speaking about is so important to be able to bring compassion into the world. And particularly at such a time when we're so polarized, and we tend to demonize other people in our polarization, which doesn't help the situation in the extent that happens. And also, a mentor of mine used to say, incremental change is far superior to delayed perfection. I mean, we can't do everything all at once, and we live in a culture where it's almost impossible to live without doing. I mean, it's hard to get to work if you live an hour drive away or whatever. So there are things that we still have to do, and a lot of us don't have the means to do it in a totally carbon neutral way, so to speak. I see Jessica put a question in the chat as well. First of all, she wants to thank you. And she said, what are some ways that you found helpful in bringing mindfulness and gaining a sense of positivity and optimism? And how does reading help with climate anxiety or even writing? Now you're muted.
Sorry. Which is perfect. It gave me a bit more time to think. Yeah, ultimately, I find that I am a bit more optimistic than most already, just naturally. But for me, I do bring mindfulness in through the breathing that I mentioned, walks in the park, and I have a daily meditation practice where I take just a small time out of my day. Nothing crazy, not like an hour of meditation, just a few minutes of meditation or yoga in the morning and evening. And I find that really helps for me to recenter myself and to get back to understanding that everything doesn't need to be so fast paced, and that I can take the time and go do some art. And when I'm in that mindset of doing art or reading books, for me, when it does come to reading, I like to mix not just something really heavy on, say, mental health and the climate crisis, but I like to pair that at the same time I read a fantasy or sci-fi. And it helps me to calm myself and to be able to get into a headspace where I can reimagine again. Because we do get so bogged down into every little bit of the daily routines that we're in, cooking meals, working, paying bills, stressing about paying bills, all those stressing about our political institutions, which, as you mentioned, are getting more and more divided. And so I find when I'm able to bring myself back to center, get myself into a space where I'll just read for a little bit, I'll write, I'll paint, then I'm calmed again, and I can have a much clearer headspace to reimagine the future, to think about the things that I want to think about. For me, the cottage in the woods that I wish I was living in one day, those sorts of things, then just being able to paint and write in that space. And once I'm able to get to that reimagining again, I find that for me, it helps bring back my optimism and positivity that might get worn down by the daily grind of work, pay bills, make sure that everything is fine. And also the daily grind of the news and watching what is going on both in my country and yours, as well as others that I've lived in. So for me, that's really how I find ways of gaining a sense of positivity and optimism. And I think it might sound very simple, but we do get really lost in our day-to-day lives. At least I do. And I find that if I can bring myself to just do nothing or do something simple, such as reading a fantasy story or painting whatever comes out, then I can find that optimism again.
So Arthur C. Brooks wrote a book called Strength to Strength. No, wait, it is Strength to Strength, I think. Oh, well, I'm not going to get the title right. But what he does talk about in the book is, we tend to think of adding things to our bucket list or taking the canvas and putting more strokes on it. And the canvas, can get pretty full and doesn't look so great anymore. And he talks about taking jade and chipping away at it to get to the beautiful thing inside. And part of what we need to think about doing is what we can chip away that will bring us to that beautiful thing rather than trying to add more and more to it. So, and I think that's wise what you say about, there are a lot of other people doing certain things because we can't do everything. So, we can kind of choose what we can focus on and do better in that. But I appreciate that. So I was going to say, Kevin, can you put us on gallery view or open us up and see if anyone else wants to share their thoughts about what they do or have any other questions?
Sure.
Thank you. And you can share too.
I would also like to add one other thing that
Sure.
helps me gain a sense of positivity and optimism is doing these talks. Honestly, I just love it, and being able to engage with people on this topic and have these sorts of questions. I love it. It's the perfect way for me to end my day today is doing this. So, yeah.
And me too. So I want to say that Jessica, she's right up on it. The book is Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. Now, Jessica, I know you're not in the second half of life, but I am. So, but I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I think that, and I think you spoke to it well about the intergenerational work that needs to get done. I mean, for me, I consider myself an elder, and I feel like I've left this or I've been part of the problem. So now I want to do as much as I can to help the solution. But we need the youth, or, I have a 24-year-old daughter because I was an old mother. And I know that, she is inheriting the earth. So, it's so important to work together in this, in everything. Does anyone else want to share what they do or have other questions for Shaun? You can raise hand or just unmute if you'd like.
I have prompted everyone to unmute, but in the meantime, while folks are thinking about whether to ask a question and what question, I just want to say, Shaun, one thing that really struck me was, 4 or 5, let me count the words here, 5 words that you had in your presentation. It was cultivate joy despite it all. There's a lot to unpack in those 5 words, and I'm wondering, what kind of tips are you going to offer us for cultivating joy?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in those words, but I do like to keep them in there because we do so often forget that we are so lucky to be living and to be living on this planet. And yeah, we are living in a climate crisis, but I do believe that we can address it. And we need to as many of my friends say, for them, it's not a protest if they can't dance. So it's kind of where I'm coming from. How can you sort of cultivate joy? For me, I always go back. I mean, this is why I'm writing a book about it. This is why I talk about it, which is art. I truly do feel that we as a society have sort of lost touch with just how important it can be. I mean, how many of us will take time, even in a week, to do some form of art? Most of us won't. We'll consume it through media, like TV. I mean, that is an art form, but we won't actually attempt because we don't feel that we are going to be any good. But as my dad always jokes, like, he will draw. It's stick people, but at least he's doing something. He enjoys that. So I think that can cultivate a lot of joy. And I think we can find a lot of joy just in the art that we create, in laughing about perhaps that we can only draw stick people. Or for me, my art often ends up being vines and like leaves. And I'm like, well, not what I was going for, but this is what it ended up being yet again for the 5th day in a row. And then being able to go and share that with friends and family. You don't have to, of course, but I find one of the things I do is invite friends to go to a cafe or invite friends over, and we don't need to talk. We'll just sit there and do art. One of my friends purposely turned the hallway of their apartment that they share with several other people into an art studio, so that people walk through that space every day and see different little pieces of art that they've created, and can bring some joy to those people's lives. Not saying that you have to go and create an art studio in your hallway, but I mean, if you live with a bunch of other people, you could create your own little art gallery that people can see. It's just one of many ways I think that we can cultivate joy, but it's definitely my favorite. I think you're muted, Bonnie.
Yes, I am. Folks can share what brings them joy, but I know for me, what brings me a lot of joy is dancing. I mean, I dance like nobody's watching when nobody's watching. And I particularly like funk music, like classic R&B funk music. I don't know what it is about it. You know, there was this thing that came out in the news that it's something you can't hear, like things that make you want to dance. It's like a certain sound that it's not within our normal hearing, but we still sense it. So I think it's super fascinating. So, I mean, I can dance for hours. I can't walk for hours, but I sure can dance for hours. The other thing I would say is love. Words of author and revolutionary love activist Valerie Kaur, Kaur. She wrote a book called See No Stranger, but she says, while joy is the gift of love, grief is the price of love. So that, and, this is going back to the grief thing. Martin Prechtel, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's the author of a book called The Smell of Rain on Dust. And it's about grief and praise, and that he would say that grief is praise for what we love. And so if we are feeling grief about what's going on with the earth and our climate, it's a measure of how much love we feel toward the natural world. So, I think that just to keep in mind, I think what Shaun said about importance of feeling what you feel, and Martin's book is so wonderful, and I'd really highly recommend it, The Smell of Rain on Dust, because it's about our culture and our Western culture, how we don't grieve, and where indigenous cultures developing countries or whatever, their grief is fully honored and expressed. And but I think that too would help. And bringing us more joy is to express that grief for what we love and have lost, so to speak. Anybody else want to share their feelings or what may bring them joy?
Thanks. I work in climate for a big corporation, so it's super depressing, right? I mean, it's really. So I'm just starting a 7-week hiatus, personal leave of absence, just because, burnout for 10 years of working on this for so long. And then there's really no place to share the grief. We don't bring it up. Even when we have other people from companies who are talking together about all of the solutions, every now and then I'll raise a timid hand and say, let's talk about how all the feelings we were feeling, and it's just not welcome that much, Shaun. So, but we do have an eco-anxiety thing at work where I ask everyone just to put their feelings in the chat, and that's so healing, just to have people just have it seen, even without having to say it in front of people, but just having it seen and see everybody else's, and you're not alone. But what gives me joy, I found, is like is turning in somehow. It's about just being grounded in the vision for what I want the world to be, in this sense, just being grounded in. So it's so hard to explain, but it's just sensing that want for equality for all sentient beings, and for everyone to thrive. Somehow there's a groundedness in that. I don't know if it's joy, but there's something about that.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thanks for sharing. And Barb, I saw you go on the camera.
So, I walk every day. I want to walk a certain number of miles every day, rain or shine. But what brings me joy is when I'm walking and I'm looking at just nature. And I live in suburbia. So, the nature is either the landscaping or it's the woods along the creek that's just down the road. And I look at little vignettes, the shape of the branches of the trees, the color of the fallen leaves, the color of the leaves this fall, because there were so many different colors of yellow and brown, the look of a squirrel as he scampers across the path, the glistening of rain on the branches, the color of grass when it starts to turn green again. And I always remind myself, well, I'm not any place special. I'm just in Hercules, California, suburbia. But look at this beautiful nature around me and how wonderful the world is and how beautiful it is, even here. And that brings me joy every day. And if I'm distressed or stressed out, that walk and those observations help me. And one of the things that really helped me do that was I used to take loads and loads of pictures with my iPhone. But now I can look, and don't have to pick up the phone and look through it like a camera, but I can look at a scene and move my eyes and compose the scene I would take and see the wonderful patterns and colors and textures of nature. That's my joy. And it's available to all of you.
Wow, that's great. I totally hear that. I know I'm a bird person, so I see the hawks. We have many hawks and hummingbirds and woodpeckers, and it's wonderful. I agree. So we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to do a formal close to the program, and folks can hang out, we can keep the room open for a little while. But I just do want to say, just take care of yourselves and others and the earth, and feel what you feel and go and take meaningful action to help create a thriving world for our children, grandchildren, and future generations. And I want to thank Shaun and thank all of you for hanging out here with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Hope you found value. And like I said, if you would like to stay on for a few minutes, that's fine. If anything else to share, but otherwise, please feel free to drop off the call. Want to be mindful of your time.